as either the hot access tier or the cool access tier at each object level. So if I go onto my containers, if I go onto my images, let's say if I go onto any object, over here I can go ahead and change the tier, and over here I have the additional setting of also the archive access tier. So over here we are going to be reviewing the costing when it comes to the hot, the cool, and the archive access tier. So normally companies go ahead and store millions of objects when it comes to the Azure storage account. When companies want to go ahead and make use of Azure storage, they'll have a lot of objects in place. So then the storage price does make a difference. Over here, I'm giving a snapshot from the pricing page for Azure storage accounts as an example. Over here, you can see the price per GB is less when objects are stored in the cool access tier when compared with the objects in the hot access tier. And then you can see that objects in the archive access tier, the price is even much more less than the objects in the cool access tier. So normally what companies can do is that initially when objects are being stored in a container, they can be part of the hot access tier. Then after some time, they can go ahead and transition those objects that are not frequently accessed onto the cool access tier. For this, you can go ahead and make use of lifecycle rules that are available as part of your Azure storage account. These lifecycle rules can be used to transition objects from one tier onto another. So if you go onto your Azure storage account, over here under data management, you have lifecycle management. Over here, I can go ahead and add a rule. So this rule can actually be used to scan all of the objects, the blobs in our storage account. If I go on to next, over here we can go ahead and add a condition. So I can say that if a blob has not been modified in the last 30 days, then go ahead and move the object or change the tier of the object onto the cool access tier. And then we can go ahead and add this lifecycle rule. So this is very useful to go ahead and ensure that if objects are not accessed that frequently, move them onto the cool access tier to go ahead and save on storage costs. But one aspect is the storage cost. The next aspect is accessing a file. Remember that with the archive access tier, in order to go ahead and access that file or object, you first need to go ahead and rehydrate that object. This is a process that you need to perform. So you need to change the access tier of that object onto either the hot or the cool access tier in order to go ahead and access the file. And it takes time to go ahead and rehydrate that particular file or object. Now just a quick note, when it comes to the blob service, everything is referred as a binary object. When I go ahead and talk about files, what I mean in the end is everything is stored as objects in the blob service. Since we can also go ahead and store files which in the end are stored as objects, I'm just giving a term of storage of files that can also be done in the Azure blob service, because sometimes students might be confused between the file share service that is available and the blob service that is available. So again, when it comes to the costing, so one costing for storage account is the storage cost. How much does it cost to store the object? But apart from that, you also have costing when it comes to performing write operations and read operations. And over here, you can see that when it comes to a read operation for an object in the hot access tier, it's much less than that of accessing an object in the cool access tier. And then it gets even worse when it comes to objects in the archive access tier. So these tiers all have a separate purpose. If your objects are not being accessed that frequently, then go ahead and choose the cool access tier. And for objects that are rarely accessed, then go ahead and choose the archive access tier. Another important point when it comes to the costing is the early deletion fee. When you go ahead and have an object in the cool access tier, you have to ensure that that data is stored for at least 30 days in the cool access tier. If you go ahead and change the access tier of a cool object onto the hot access tier earlier than 30 days, then you are charged an early deletion fee. The same goes for the archive access tier. Over here, you have to ensure that this is used for objects that are stored for at least 180 days. So depending upon the requirements for storage of your objects, you have different features when it comes to the access tiers, but you have to be wary about the costing as well. Now in this chapter, I just want to go ahead and have a quick review when it comes to Azure storage encryption. So over here, I have a set of storage accounts in place. Let me go on to one of my storage accounts. Now over here, when I go under security and networking, if I go onto encryption, let me go ahead and just hide this. By default, all of the data that is stored in the underlying data center is encrypted at rest. And over here, the encryption is done with the help of Microsoft Managed Keys. Those encryption keys are used to go ahead and securely store the blobs and the files in the underlying Azure data center. For some companies, this is a major requirement, wherein even though the data is securely held in an Azure data center, still the data needs to be encrypted at rest. That means when the data is finally stored on the disk in the underlying Azure data center, it needs to be in an encrypted format. When you go ahead and request for the object, so let's say you're going ahead and accessing a blob in a container in the Azure storage account, this service will automatically go ahead and use the encryption key to decrypt the data and return it to you. So all of this is done in the background. You don't need to do anything to go ahead and decrypt your data. Now, you could go ahead and use Microsoft Managed Keys, or you could also go ahead and use customer managed keys. So customers over here can go ahead and use their own encryption keys. If you have an Azure Key Vault in place, you can actually go ahead and use an encryption key that is available in the Azure Key Vault. So over here, let me go ahead and quickly create an Azure Key Vault. Now, currently, if I go on to the overview for my storage account is in the North Europe location. So in another tab, let me go ahead and create a new resource. Over here, I'll go ahead and search for Key Vault. I'll go ahead and choose Key Vault. I'll go ahead and hit on create. Now over here, I'll go ahead and choose one of my existing resource groups. Over here, let me go ahead and give a unique keyword name. I'll choose my location as North Europe. I'll choose the pricing tier as standard. I'll just go ahead and use the days to retain the deleted keyword. I'll go on next for the access policy. I'll leave it as the vault access policy. I'll go on next for networking. I'll go on tags. I'll go on review and create. And let me go ahead and hit on create. This will just take a couple of minutes. Let's come back once we have the keyword in place. Now, once the deployment is complete, I'll go ahead onto the keyword. Over here, now I'll go onto my keys and let me go ahead and generate a new encryption key. Over here, let me go ahead and just give a name for the key and I'll go ahead and hit on create. Now, once I have the key in place, I'll go back onto my storage account. I'll go onto encryption. Over here, I'll go on to customer managed keys. Let me go ahead and just hide this. I'll go ahead and select a keyword and a key. Over here, I can go ahead and select my keyword and I can go ahead and choose my key, hit on select, and over here, then I can go ahead and hit on save. So now over here, it is going ahead and now using my encryption key that I defined in my key vault for the underlying encryption of my blobs and my files. And remember, this data is encrypted on the disks that are stored in the underlying Azure data center. So in this chapter, I just want to have that quick review when it comes to storage encryption that is available for your Azure storage accounts. In this chapter, I want to go through the policies that you can actually associate with the containers in your storage account. So over here, I have a storage account in place. If I go on to containers, over here, I have an images container in place. So we are at the container level, and over here, you can see that you have access policy. I can go ahead and add two types of access policy. The first is something known as a stored access policy. When you go ahead and create a shared access signature, you can actually go ahead and create it based on a stored access policy. So the benefit of this is that the permissions now of that shared access signature are actually linked onto this stored access policy. So at any point in time, if you want to go ahead and revert the access that is given via that shared access signature, it can be done with the help of the stored access policy. Just to go ahead and give an example as a review, over here, I'll go ahead and add a policy. I'll give a name in permissions. I'll go ahead and give the read and the list permissions. Over here, let me go ahead and choose the start time and the end time. And let me go ahead and hit on OK. And let me go ahead and hit on save. So now we have a stored access policy in place. Now I'll go on to my storage account. There is also a storage explorer in place. Now I'll go on to my blob container. I'll go on to my images container. I'll right click and let me go ahead and get a shared access signature. So I can go ahead and now generate a shared access signature at this container level. In the access policy, I can now go ahead and choose that access policy. So now all the permissions are being inherited by this access policy. I can then go ahead and hit on create. Now I have the URI and the query string. Now I'll go on to Azure Storage Explorer. Over here, let me go on to manage accounts and let me go ahead and just remove an account that I already have. I'll go ahead and click on yes and hit on apply. Let me go ahead and close this and let me go on to manage accounts again and add an account. Over here, I'll go ahead and choose now attaching onto a blob container. And over here, I'm going to go ahead and choose shared access signature and go on to next. Over here, I need to go ahead and give the blob container SaaS URL. So I can go on to Azure portal. I can go ahead and copy now the URI. Let me go ahead and paste it over here. So we have the display name. I'll go on to next and let me go ahead and hit on connect. Over here, now I can see the objects in my container. Let me go ahead and also just hit on apply over here. So if I go on to storage accounts, if I go on to my attached containers, over here, I can see my images container. If I go on to a data container, over here, I don't have anything because I've only gone ahead and created a SaaS URL based on the images container. If I go onto my file shares, I don't have anything. I don't have any queues, nothing, because I've only gone ahead and created a shared access signature based on the images container. Now, let's say you want to go ahead and revoke the access of this particular images container. What I can do is that I can now go back onto my storage account. I'll go back onto my containers. I'll go onto my images container. I'll go ahead onto access policy. And over here, let me go ahead and now edit the stored access policy. And let me go ahead and remove these permissions and then hit on OK and then hit on save. So now what I've done is that I've removed the permissions of the access policy that is linked onto that shared access signature. If I go onto my Azure storage account and if I click on refresh all, if I go onto my storage accounts, attached containers, blob containers, if I go onto images, over here you can see you're getting now an authorization error. And that is because now we've gone ahead and removed the permission. So this is one policy that you can actually go ahead and create. Another is a policy based on immutable blob storage. Let's say you don't want anyone to make any sort of changes onto the blob objects that are part of this container. You can go ahead and add a policy based on immutable blob storage. Over here, you have two types of policies. One is a legal hold and another is time-based retention. Over here, you can go ahead and say that no one is allowed to change anything in this container for 1 day. I can go ahead and then hit on OK. So now once we have this policy in place, if I go back onto my images container, if I go ahead and try to delete an object from this particular container, so over here, you can see this operation is not permitted as the blob is immutable due to the policy. Now, obviously, it takes around 30 seconds for this to take effect. If you're able to delete the object, you need to wait for some time for the policy to take effect. But this is another example of a policy that you can define. This is known as the immutable blob storage policy. Hi, and welcome back. Now, in this chapter, I just want to go through some important points when it comes on to the different types of storage accounts. So we have looked into detail on how to work with general purpose V2 storage accounts, but there are other types of storage accounts that you can create. So if I go on to the storage accounts service, let me hit on create. So in the creation of the storage account, let me choose a resource group, an existing one. I'll scroll down. I'll just choose my location as North Europe. Here, when it comes on to the performance, so when we choose standard, we get by default a general purpose V2 storage account, but we can also choose a premium based storage account. Now in premium based, again, we have different options. So if you only want to have the blob service when you're looking at block blobs, so you have one for block blobs and you have another for page blobs. Page blobs is used for storing your virtual hard disk files that get linked onto an Azure virtual machine. So if you want to manage those disks yourself, you can create an Azure storage account with the type of premium and page blobs. You can use block blobs for the normal blob service. And then you have file shares. So in file shares, you have premium file shares. Now, what is the meaning of premium? Well, you get faster performance when it comes to working with your blobs, the blob service, and when working with your file share service. So if you want the least latency, that means the time it takes to access your data. And if you want better performance, then ensure to choose the account type as premium. So here, let me create an account based on block blobs and premium. I'll give a name here. Giving a name of premium block blob. Here in the redundancy, so depending upon the service you choose, there is a limitation when it comes on to the redundancy. Then just go ahead and create this storage account. So I'll just hit on create. Now in another tab, let me again go on to storage accounts. Let me hit on create. Here let me choose a resource group. I'll again choose my location. Here let me again choose premium. This time I'll choose file shares.